another week again to be taking a look at yet another Big Finish release, and today it's quite a special one because I'm going to be taking a look at the fourth and final volume of the War Doctor Adventures on Big Finish, which is, of course, is also very special because, of course, recently we have lost John Hurt, unfortunately, to cancer, meaning that this box set is slightly more emotional than it probably would have been before, because although it's the end, we sort of now know it is the definite end due to him no longer being with us, which is an utter shame, to be quite honest, because I was shocked when he died. I think it was now over a month ago, something like that. Just as a little bit of a notice though, however, previously in this month I did take a look at Big Finish's release of The Invisible Man, which I highly recommend taking a look at that as well as the actual release itself. It's not necessarily Doctor Who, it's a H.G. Wells classic, however John Hurt starred in it as the Invisible Man. It is absolutely excellent, and I wanted to take a look at that release because I wanted to take a look at John Hurt as an actor, sort of a step away from the War Doctor a little bit to take a look at something different that he's done. So yeah, I thought that you may as well check that review out as well. I highly recommend the release, and because it is a rather special one, especially due to current circumstances. Now going back onto the War Doctor, of course this is the final box set that we've now had the company of for 2 years. It started off with only the Monstrous, but Infernal Devices, Agents of Chaos, and now have Casualties of Time. I will leave the link in the description below to go and take a look at those releases and all the previous ones, and also I recommend checking out the reviews of the previous releases as well. I've done coverage of them all so far. So firstly, taking a look at some of the details on the Big Finish website, is currently £20 for the CD physical version, and it's also £20 for the download as well, and then after that it does of course go up. I do believe it goes up at the end of April to the actual recommended retail price where it goes into Forbidden Planet stores and things like that, and I do believe the recommended retail is £30 or £35. I do believe the download price may go up to £25 as well, don't count me on that one though. So the general format for this box set is exactly the same to the previous ones. You have 3 brand new stories which sort of go to different settings for each one. However, generally overall we have the running plot arc going all the way through and the overall story, because it is of course the Time War, so sort of that dominates every single story that you could possibly have in this box set. To start off, we have an episode written by Guy Adams which is called Pretty Lies, then we have The Lady of Obsidian written by Andrew Smith, and then we have the series finale and the last ever War Doctor story. I can't get over saying that, it's very sad. We have the Enigma Dimension written by Nicholas Briggs, so it's very nice to see that we're going back to the head writer of Big Finish and the person that was responsible for the first ever series and all 3 stories in that, so it's nice to see the ending is sort of going back to where it all started. Of course have John Hurt as the War Doctor, and once again this box set absolutely excellent. He played a brilliant character. I think that we definitely got to see a lot more of the darker side of the War Doctor in there. I know a lot more people wanted to see a bit more of that darker side and exactly how far he would go. There's been some excellent scenes in this box set, and probably some that I would in fact class as some of the best War Doctor scenes of all time. I just think, for example, there was a scene in episode 2 where he was literally flying a Dalek spaceship. Therefore, he's probably one of the best Doctors ever for that reason alone. Generally, he is an absolutely amazing actor. I think that for this box set, he definitely did the War Doctor justice. I think that John Hurt sort of brought something into it that the TV show necessarily didn't. I think that John Hurt got to do something with the War Doctor that, although he didn't really know to start with what Doctor Who sort of, the science and all of that, he said himself that it was rather complicated. However, I think the Big Finish have allowed him to adapt the War Doctor to something that he can understand, meaning that he can bring something to the role that necessarily the TV show didn't give him. Other people, we have Louise Jameson playing Leela, which was a surprise. I'll admit, I did sort of forget that Leela would be in this box set until like about a month ago, but yeah, it was all very exciting to start with when we were announced that in fact Leela will be in this. It's sort of the closest that we're ever going to get to having a classic Doctor or a classic character or anything from the classic era meeting the War Doctor, so it was very nice to have a little bit of sort of bringing back the past in this, because that definitely brought back the past with the Doctor himself. And then we also have Jacqueline Pearce, who's of course playing Cardinal Elistra, who's been in it since the very beginning. She's sort of, I would like to say, the Doctor's companion, but in a way she's not. She's travelled with the Doctor in a sort of on occasion, I guess. I like to sort of think that they love and hate each other at the same time, because there's some scenes where you can definitely have a lot of tension between them, a lot of dislike, a lot of sort of disagreement. However, I would actually guarantee that if anything was to happen to Cardinal Elistra or vice versa with the Doctor, then either one would sort of feel the effects of that and they would sort of feel emotionally attached, because I think there's definitely a bond between them. I think that having the War Doctor very much an older male and then having Cardinal Elistra an older female, I think that it corresponds together extremely well. I think that they're an incredibly good team. So starting off with episode 1, Pretty Lies, which is sort of the opening story that, as with the majority of the other box sets, sort of fades you in a little bit. I think that we had a story like that in the previous series as well, where we sort of have one that is a little bit slow to start with. However, with this one, it had a very dark twist towards the end, which I'll get onto in a little bit. So basically, it's a little bit of a peaceful desert planet to an extent. It's sort of very quiet, and we have some little villages here and there. It's all very nice. They sort of know that something's going on in the universe, but don't really know particularly what. Meet this character called Shandell, who is sort of an intergalactic journalist. He has this spaceship thing that he goes to different war zones and things like that, and interviews key pivotal people. And because it's of course the Time War, and he's a time traveller, he's able to go back in time, and he wants to interview the Doctor. And of course the Doctor being the Doctor, or the War Doctor being the War Doctor even, he's not really very happy about this. He's very grumpy, he gets very annoyed straight away, he doesn't like the idea of this happening, and he interviews him, or he doesn't interview him, he just has a conversation with him, and then he uses that recording and sort of manipulates into something about the Daleks and how they should all be destroyed. And he says that how the media manipulation is contorting what people think of him, and I think that is very much something that I would be very surprised if Guy Adams didn't take inspiration from current affairs in that media thing, to say the least. But yeah, a lovely scene halfway through this story, which I think is very much, it's not even a special scene to be honest. We just have the War Doctor sort of getting a little bit of breath outside, and he turns to the side to see this old man, and then have a little bit of a conversation about how nobody sees him like the older guy, and they talk about how sort of things are going on and how he thinks that the Doctor is going to be able to save people. There's this very interesting quote where the War Doctor says something like, for the sort of 8th time this week, here I am saving everybody again, and you can really tell by this point that the War Doctor is a bit fed up, which to be quite honest, if I was him, I would be as well, fighting this eternal war constantly over and over again. And we definitely, I think that in this series, we've seen it a little bit in the last one as well, where we have the War Doctor really getting fed up, really getting put down, really just getting annoyed of how long this war's going on and how many people are dying. He's now had so many potential companions. He's not even been looking for companions, but people that if this was out of the Time War necessarily probably would be in the TARDIS, such as Rejoice for an example in series 1, and then we had somebody in series 2 as well, and then even in this one we had Shandell towards the end when the Doctor sort of liked him a little bit, and he ended up just dying even when everything was over. There was sort of a little bit of a moment where you think, well that happened, you know. It's sort of one of those things where you think that the War Doctor, he just wants to end everything. And I think that we're definitely getting up to this point now that we've seen in the Day of the Doctor, when he uses the moment, and I think that definitely Big Finish have probably purposely done that throughout to just make him sound a little bit fed up. Speaking of people that sound fed up and annoyed, we also have the Prime Dalek in this one as well. I think it's called the Prime Dalek because the last series we had on called the Prime Dalek, and in the first series we had one called the Prime Dalek. However, in this one, I do believe the reference him to the Dalek Time Strategist. Yeah, that's what it says on the Big Finish website. But yeah, the Dalek Time Strategist, he's basically a little bit of an emotional Dalek, to be honest, because Nicholas Briggs has done him, so he can sort of like, he sounds a bit emotional. You can tell that he's not really necessarily robotic. He's a little bit annoyed once again. He's basically the War Doctor but a Dalek, so he wants to destroy everything, but he seems a little bit more mean. Definitely for this one, the Daleks are absolutely ruthless, much like many moments in the previous box sets as well. For example, at the end of this story, when absolutely everything is saved, the War Doctor and Cardinal Listra go off to this other planet using Shandell's spaceship, and the Daleks basically do a U-turn, go back when everything is fine, goes to the planet that the Doctor has just saved, and blew it up. Because the Daleks never normally do that, and basically everybody, which is what I love, absolutely everybody in this story died, except the Daleks, except Cardinal Listra, and except the War Doctor. Everybody that the Doctor met, everybody that the Doctor even talked to, and I think that that in itself shows why Big Finish could write the Time War, because they just understand it down to a T. It's absolutely excellent, yet grim and dark to have a story like this, and that's perfect. The second episode for this box set is The Lady of Obsidian, and this is where the story comes in, where Leela comes back into the Doctor's life, and it's one of those ones that, once again, I didn't expect Leela to come back how she did. I sort of expected her to sort of come back fighting, but it turns out that very early on in the Time War, Leela went missing, presumed dead, and then it's up until this point, presumably probably over halfway through the Time War. We don't particularly know, which is sort of good at the same time. We don't really know, but I'm presuming probably midway through the Time War, she comes back, but this time it's a little bit unexpected. The War Doctor and Cardinal Listra are in this little pod thing from Shandell because he's now dead, so it's technically their spaceship, so they're going along. The Daleks are on pursuit and they're yet to blow up yet another planet. It's basically exactly the same premise to the last one. The Daleks want to go to this defenseless planet that has no relevance whatsoever and blow everybody up on it. It's repetitive, which is great because it shows exactly how war is, and it shows how the Time War is, doing the same thing over and over again. However, as it is the same thing, this one does bring more to it. We have the Obsidian people this time, and we have this very very interesting force, because in the last episode I wanted to say sort of from a different dimension, but it turns out from this one we have characters that are essentially from a different dimension and an alien that isn't really meant to exist, which is something that the Time War has done. Find out later on in the story that Leela and her people are sort of protecting this dimensional rip, where you have these people coming through, which I think, well, they're on the cover, so you can make head to tail of them. I've stared at that cover now for about 2 hours, and I just can't understand these creatures. Basically, they're this very odd and yet amazing looking creature. It's a little bit undimensional. You can't really figure out what is top, what is bottom, what's the sides, or anything like that. Do they have arms? It's sort of a little bit weird, and they're not really of this world, which is absolutely excellent. The design of them is great. They look interesting, they look different, and they essentially look like they're from a different universe, which is perfect. Aliens from a different dimension, we have sort of their leader, who's called Skull. They in fact sort of take over a spaceship, and they then use this because the Daleks come along and they want to invade the spaceship that they think the Doctor and everybody else is on. They go and invade, and it turns out that Skull's people are in fact on there, which are the aliens from the different dimension, and they in fact take on the Daleks, and they take on the Daleks extremely well, because they get a Dalek, basically rip the armour off it, take out the mutant on the inside, and from what I can gather from the sound design, I'm guessing that they literally squeezed it to death until it splattered. But to be quite honest, it does sound quite amusing, yet quite sad at the same time. I felt sympathy for a Dalek for like 1 minute. However, it's interesting because these people are in fact sort of, they can take on the Daleks. Because they're from a different dimension, they could potentially take them on and wipe them out, to be quite honest. Because there's a moment halfway through where the people sort of take on the Dalek saucer because they've now took over a Dalek scout ship. The Dalek time strategist tries to in fact contact this spaceship, and then it turns out that Skull's people are on the inside, and he basically says, move out the way, you're in the way, get lost. And then he's not really very happy about this, the Prime Daleks, so they sort of have a little bit of an engagement. They find out that the enemies that they have are the same enemies, so therefore, for a minute, there's a little bit of an alliance going on, but however, the Daleks, of course, want to blow them up anyway. By the end, they don't end up doing that, and the War Doctor ends up doing it instead. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept to, in fact, have an alien race that could potentially take on the Daleks, and in fact win, and to be quite honest, it would be nice to see that at some point in the near future, having a race that actually defeats the Daleks, and it not being the Doctor. On to Leela now for this one, and basically what's happened is early on in the Time War she was fighting and she got shot by a new type of Dalek, which I do believe was called a Time Disruptor Dalek. We've never had one, I don't think, in Doctor Who before. I did do a brief Google to see what one would look like, because judging by the description that they sort of gave, it would have looked pretty bloody cool. But yeah, basically when it shoots you, it rips you out the whole of time, you know, casually, which is great. So up until Leela, unfortunately, very early on in the Time War, but somehow it went wrong. I'm guessing that the Dalek was a little bit of a prototype. It sort of backfired, and it turns out that this version of Leela came back, and basically every potential thing that she's done is now in her head. So every time that she makes a decision, so for example, if she went with the Doctor, if she stayed with the Tribe of the 17, if she married that guy that I can't remember what he's called from in the Invasion of Time, if she had kids, if she didn't, if she was a warrior, if she wasn't, her head is pretty much full of all these different potential ideas. So when the Doctor comes along, she knows deep down that she should trust him because he's a part of her past. However, she doesn't, because he's been responsible for so many different deaths that she's had. So it's a very dark concept once again, and something that the War Doctor does in fact resolve at the very end of the episode, which is great to see. It would have been a little bit sad to have sort of Leela in this and not have them properly engaging together and having a little bit of development in there. So I think that they sort of got that at the end of this episode and sort of fixed it up, which is great. So in the very ending story, we had Leela in her prime. Finish off this episode at the very end, we have an amazing battle sequence where we have the War Doctor in his Dalek time saucer, as you do, just having a fly, and then he basically gets rid of all of the Daleks in that sector. Not the Prime Dalek though, or the Dalek time strategist even, of course. And yeah, it's an excellent scene where we have Cardinal Lister in there as well. Cardinal Lister is not in this one as much, which is okay, but yeah, we have this excellent scene at the end, which once again is probably one of my favourite scenes that the War Doctor has ever had. Then just a little Easter egg at the end as well, Veclin comes in, which the only reason why I can sort of remember who Veclin is, very recently when running up to this box set, I've been listening back to Only the Monstrous, and Veclin comes back for a very brief scene. She's been promoted back to this sort of higher rank of soldier. It's just very nice to see her back again, just for that very minor scene to take on the Daleks, sort of having that little bit of an alliance in there. It's a little bit of a Journey's End style of idea where a few people come back, but it's sort of very much wrapping up the box set. It's nice to sort of have that in there at the end. It's a nice little bit of nostalgia for this era, and once again sort of really showing that it is the last box set. Here we go, the final one, The Enigma Dimension, written by Nicholas Briggs. Now, a few people have been a little bit unsure show how this one would end off, because of course you can't end the Time War in this box set because that was done in the Day of the Doctor. And what I like about this one is it was done in sort of any way it could have been done, because it basically carries on. This is not an ending, there's no big massive grand finale, it's just sort of a final of a box set without the potential of it leading on to something else. It's a story in its own right, it's nothing really too big because the Time War itself is big. I think that I mentioned that way back in my first ever review, that I think that with this Time War box set you're constantly on that high. The thing with Doctor Who these days is you get to the series finale and it almost sort of goes, right, it's the final now, we need to get big, we need to bring back the Daleks, we need to do all this massive stuff and explosions, but because you're in the Time War, you pretty much got that every single story anyway. Therefore, when you need to up the ante at the very end, it sort of does that for this one. We get a little bit of a sort of a closing scene. However, it's just a random story. It's just an ending that would normally have, and that's great because it sort of shows that the Time War after this would just continue. And I like the way that we've not really got a direct run into the Day of the Doctor. Big Finish like being able to leave gaps. For example, at the end of Doom Coalition, I don't think that that's leading directly into the 8th Doctor Time War box set. The final episode sees Leela, Cardinal Lystra and the War Doctor going back to Gallifrey, and it got me very excited because the first scene that we pretty much had was the Panopticon and their amazing siren styles of alarms, and that gets me very excited every single time I hear it. Don't know why. Yeah, well, it's probably because I'm a sad human being, but yeah, I think there's just having that scene of having the alarm sort of echo through the Panopticon. It is a brilliant sort of sound effect that they use, and once again something that say happened in Doom Coalition, one of the first scenes in that where the 11 escapes, probably one of my favourites that I've ever listened to. I just think that it's excellent. But yeah, I think that with this one where we have them returning back to Gallifrey, we have an interesting concept where the Enigma, which is basically this massive orb thing entity, which is once again sort of from a different dimension of our ununderstanding. I think the War Doctor describes it as defying the physics of every universe. So it reminds me a little bit of the Void Ship from the end of Doomsday in Series 2. Sort of one of those things that you can't really decipher. And interestingly, the Time Lords on Gallifrey, they're sort of going around with these alarms and they think that the Daleks are going to attack in any imminent moment. And of course, what happens is Leela goes off and she gets sort of a little bit distracted, and the Daleks just all of a sudden appear in the middle of the Panopticon and scaring a ton of Time Lords, of course, because that would happen to anybody. But Enigma is projecting these fake Daleks, these sort of hologram Daleks, into the minds of the Time Lords, essentially making them going a little bit mad. And I think that is once again quite a dark idea. And also have the return of Castellan as well, which I don't know why, but I have sort of this love for Castellan because in every episode that he's in, I just like that he's there. I like that he's a character that we always see constantly, and it would be nice for when the new series inevitably brings back Gallifrey and sort of more of its potential, where so the Doctor doesn't just arrive, sort of do one thing and then leave again, because for some reason we can't have a story just set on Gallifrey, which would be, you know, a very easy one to do. But yeah, it would be just a simple plot. But yeah, it would be nice to see Castellan return with an older actor, you know, to have him in there. It just would be nice to have him, you know, because he's sort of a Time Lord that's been here now since the Deadly Assassin. He's sort of a reoccurring person. For example, this time he's played by Alan David, which is the same person who plays Sneed in The Unquiet Dead, you know, creepy Sneed. But yeah, interesting. He's a nice character, and once again, it's nice to see him back in this one. Now moving on to the Enigma Dimension itself. Basically, the Enigma takes the transformation of Leela and uses Leela's mind and things like that to sort of communicate with the Doctor and Elistra. And the Enigma itself is basically this other dimension where the Doctor uses the TARDIS, which he finally gets back at the end of the last story, which is a very nice scene to see because he's been sort of lost without the TARDIS now for sort of 3 stories. But yeah, with this one we have them going to the Enigma Dimension, which I can't exactly explain because it's one of those things that you literally can't explain. It's something that Big Finish do incredibly well. I always say over and over again, pretty much in every single review, how this would look brilliant in the TV show, how this would look good in the TV show. I think that the TV show would sort of depict this certain stuff. However, with this one, for the first time ever, I can honestly say I don't know how the TV show could do this, because we essentially go to a dimension where we don't really understand the physics. We can't physically see it. Everything is sort of moving. The way that I could sort of describe it a little bit is sort of like, you know, in Warrior's Gate, where everything looks a little bit weird and it's just sort of a bit of a cloud dimension in a way. It's a little bit like that, but yeah, basically all the colours move around and it's all very odd and confusing, and probably if it was in the actual show, it would give every single viewer probably a massive headache. I don't really want to go into this one because I think that if if you want this one, which I highly recommend you should, buy the bloody thing. I think that basically it's one of those ones to just wrap up the story. We have the Daleks coming into it as well using the Enigma. The Enigma backfires and goes, I'm not helping you anymore, I'm sort of helping the Time Lords. The Daleks aren't very happy about this, understandably, and then at the very end we sort of have the closest to a showdown that we're ever going to get with the Time War, because the thing with the Time War is you essentially can't sort of have the showdown at the end because it will be too mass and too amazing. Basically you have the Dalek Time Strategist saying this stuff to the Doctor, or the Doctor, and basically saying, you're going to do this, and you're going to sort of, he's trying to predict it, because he's sort of a very clever Dalek. He's a little bit more emotional, as I said, to a normal Dalek or a normal Dalek Supreme, and he says, well, I know you because you're the Doctor, and you're going to save everybody at the last minute, all this stuff, and then he goes, no, because that's what the Doctor would do. I'm not the Doctor anymore. And for a scene, you're sort of like, he's going to blow absolutely everybody up, you know, and he's going to basically risk absolutely everything, because that's great. That's what the War Doctor is. Basically, we don't have a clue what's going on in his mind, and he could potentially do anything. He could blow everybody up if he wants to. I mean, he probably won't, but he would at the same time. And then, of course, by the very end, we have Cardinal Listra, the Doctor, and Leela returning back to Gallifrey, of course, and everything is sort of, I would say, all right and dandy, but it's not. You're in the middle of a war. It's not giving it closure, which I know it sounds very odd, and so I would always pick on sort of certain episodes for that. It doesn't give closure and everything like that. However, for probably the first ever time in Doctor Who's history, the fact that this doesn't give closure is excellent, because as I say, it's the Time War. It goes round and round in circles. The final scene of the box set is Leela and the Doctor in the TARDIS, and we have this very nice scene at the end, which I was waiting for the whole box set for, where we have a sort of Leela coaxing out a little bit of that Doctor that we used to know in there, and you really sort of get a little bit of sort of a glimmer in a way in the War Doctor's eye, where you can really tell that Leela sort of being present has sort of brought a little bit back in him. And the scene at the very end, it's not really anything big, it's not a massive monologue, which I'm sort of glad, because of this being a context that where everybody dies and where things go on and everything ends, I think that having a War Doctor monologue saying that, oh, how everything dies in the end and how everything is bad, I think would have been incredibly inconvenient and sort of incredibly sort of double meaning, you know. So I'm really glad, for my own emotional sake, as well as many other people's, that we didn't have a massive monologue about death. The ending line, I think, sums up this box set incredibly well, as well as the whole series as a whole and the War Doctor as a whole. And to be quite honest, if there was sort of one of those quotey things for the War Doctor, it would be an excellent quote to end it on, and it would be something, I think it said something like, I'm a warrior like all of the Time Lords, but probably I'm the worst. And to admit, and I'm happy to admit, I did sort of have a little bit of a tear in my eye at the end, because, you know, it's just sad to see him gone, but at the same time, I'm glad that they gave him this send-off, because I'm just ever thankful for the fact that Big Finish have in fact been able to get this Doctor and actually do something with him. And what I love is the fact that we now pretty much have the equivalent of what the Ninth Doctor had, because we've now got about 12 or 13 episodes with the War Doctor, which is exactly the same to what Christopher Eccleston had. In fact, we essentially have exactly the same amount of stories to what Christopher Eccleston had. So I think that alone, Big Finish have gave him a series, and they've gave him a whole one. So this is essentially the whole thing before series 1, and now he's pretty much equal and on par with the Ninth Doctor. And as I say, for that I'm ever grateful, because the TV show would have never done that. They didn't give him the justice that he deserved in the Day of the Doctor. I'm just glad they've been able to get him and go and do something with him, and it's great. I'm just glad that they were able to do it when they could, because just imagine if they got the license like a year or so later. As I say, I'm just glad that they've been able to give the War Doctor the actual justice he deserves, and they've certainly done that. Overall, this box set, does it need saying, it's absolutely incredible. I think that we have a ton of Dalek stories in this one, really ruthless, and it's great, really getting down to the grips of the Time War, really great getting down to the grips of the War Doctor as well. We have lots of different scenes in there, which I absolutely adored. This doesn't need saying either. Go and buy it, just do it. Seriously, if you've got the other three, then no questions, buy this one, complete your series, and have all of them together on a shelf being nice and pretty, and just say, I've got the full era of the War Doctor, and be bloody proud of it. But yeah, I just think that if you've not listened to any of these yet, and now they're all out, go onto the Big Finish website, buy the bundle. I know that Only the Monstrous, I think, is an award-winning box set now, so I think that every so often, more recently than others, it does in fact get reduced every so often back down to £20. So buy it when it's on reduce, along with the others, whenever they have a sale on. go and do it. I highly recommend it, because if you're a new series fan and haven't got into Big Finish yet, this is the perfect way to do it. No excuses, and now the fact that John Hurt is unfortunately no longer with us, it's sort of only right to, isn't it? And as well, on a note, if you're an additional Big Finish fan that has done a lot of other Big Finish listening in the past, also buy these box sets, they're incredible. And if you want something a little bit new, not related to Doctor Who, buy The Invisible Man as well, because that is a great release and something brilliant to sit down to and really get introduced to different characters and how just exactly John Hurt's acting can work, because it is incredible. So yeah, that's that. That's the end of the War Doctor, and also bringing the end to this review series. So thanks for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a big like, and please subscribe if you're not already. If you have any questions, please do leave them below, and I'll be sure to answer them at some point in the near future. Thanks again for watching. As always, I will see you all next time. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.